Welcome back to Turning the Page. I'm host Donnie Morse, and we have with us Bill Hartley today, who has written Another Kind of Gold, The Life of Albert King Thurber. Bill, before we went to commercial break, we were going to talk a little bit about Albert Thurber's relationship with John Low Butler. But before we do that, tell us a little bit about Albert's dealings with the Utah War.
Okay, Spanish Fork was shocked when people heard that the President of the United States had sent a federal army out here to put down a Mormon rebellion. They didn't know they were in rebellion. And when word came that the army was coming into the territory, President Young had not received notice that he was being replaced as governor. Therefore, as the governor of Utah, he declared martial law and said anybody who invades this territory is going to have to deal with us. We had a militia in those days called the Nauvoo Legion, which drilled every summer, kind of a ragtag group that didn't do much hadn't much military experience. And so the call went out in late 1857 to drill, to collect supplies. Spanish Fork people had to donate food and wagons and materials for their little unit of the Nauvoo Legion to be called up by Commanding General Daniel Wells and go up to Salt Lake Valley and then go up to East Canyon and up to Echo Canyon. The strategy for the Nauvoo Legion was something like, we know they've got to come through Echo Canyon to reach Great Salt Lake. They'll get as far as Fort Bridger, which we've burned, and hopefully they'll stay there for the winter. But in case they don't, we've got to fortify Echo Canyon. So the people from Spanish Fork, Albert Thurber and others, were involved with digging trenches and building rock fortifications along Echo Canyon and East Canyon. We waited out a very quiet, worried winter to see what would happen in the spring when the passes would open and the army would come in.
So he was involved with building fortification types there in Echo Canyon, and then later, if I understand it right, they were dealing with the troops once they came into Utah. That's
correct. Peace negotiators worked it out for the army to march through Salt Lake City respectfully and to camp way out in the wilderness at Camp Floyd out in Cedar Valley and set up a fort that they named Camp Floyd. And at that point, we had an army of occupation, which was close, but not terribly close, to the settlements. There was concern that the Mormons might say something that would upset the army and bring down the wrath. And so the word went out to people like Bishop Butler here in Spanish Fork, do not hold any church meetings. You can hold private prayer meetings, but no public church meetings. We want it quiet for a while.
So that's all we have to do to get church canceled is have an occupying army come in, and we can get church canceled for a little bit.
That could do it. And there was a lot of trade that went on between Spanish Fork and Camp Floyd that was beneficial, but also somewhat frowned upon by church leadership.
So this was kind of underground trading,
yes,
so to speak?
Yes. Now, Albert Thurber was in Provo one time when the Army unit was brought in to help a judge try a case against Mormons, which Mormons felt was totally unfair. And Thurber mentions in his journal that he talked with one of the soldiers that was there that he apparently knew from Rhode Island. And it's a kind of an interesting exchange that this man said, are you a polygamist? And he says, yes. And he says, well, I appreciate you being honest about it, you know. And then he talked about the immorality of some of the people that were with the Army.
You know, talking about his journal, that's one thing I wanted to mention is here in the back of the book is included a DVD or a CD that has
the original journal.
A scan of the exact pages of the journal.
Digital images of the exact journal, plus the typescript of the journal, and a lot of the photographs and maps and things we used in the book. Yes, well, and the book itself is also included in the CD.
Well, that's an amazing resource.
And the cover of the book is actually the cover of the journal.
Oh.
That's part of the actual journal that we were able to relocate 2 years ago. It had disappeared in family hands for about 50 years, and we finally tracked it down. We had a typescript of it, but we've done a better typescript, which is part of the contribution of the book.
Well, that really aids to the historian and to just the general reader who wants to go back and check sources that you've used or see it for themselves.
Right. Now let me suggest that I've been a history teacher for a long, long time, and I run into people all the time on an airplane or visiting somewhere where they say, "Oh, I don't like history." History in a textbook form is dull. The best way to get into history, if you want to get into, say, World War II or the Civil War or any period of history, is biography. Because you have a human being that is involved in all these developments, not just a list of the developments. So biography gives an individual history in a way that registers with them. They can get a handle on Spanish Fork history. They can get a handle on Utah history. They get a handle on LDS history through that biography approach.
So, Albert Thurber, tell us a little bit about this connection that he had with the Lows.
Well, with John Butler, what's interesting is the descendants of John Butler married into the Thurber family.
Oh.
And so they have an interest going back in both of these people. In fact, the Butler family has put plaques about Thurber and about Butler here in your town square.
Oh.
But they were colleagues to start with. Albert Thurber was a counselor to Bishop Butler, and then as John Butler became ill and was dying, Albert Thurber was made the counselor, the acting bishop, basically. When Butler dies, then Thurber becomes the acting bishop and then serves for over 13 years as the bishop in Spanish Fork. And of course, in one part of his journal, he spends 1863, 6 months of detailed journal entries about day-by-day activities in Spanish Fork, be it civic affairs or church affairs or family affairs or crops or bridges or whatever else. It's a fascinating window in Spanish Fork history.
So at that time, not only was he bishop, but he was mayor for part of that.
Albert Thurber was one of the pillars in Spanish Fork. He was the mayor for several terms. He was elected to the territorial legislature for more than 13 terms, and so he's representing Utah County, Spanish Fork, on all kinds of territorial matters, roads and water and animal control and those sorts of things. And he does the same thing as the county commissioner. They were called a selectman in those days, and he served as one of the Utah County selectmen, and had a lot to do with county activities, roads and schools, and building a jail in Spanish Fork and a courthouse and that sort of thing. He's one of the founding pillars of this area.
Speaking of which, we have a very significant landmark here in Spanish Fork named for Albert Thurber, which is the school here. We have
the old Thurber School. Now, technically, that was built after he moved.
Yes.
When you get into this early history of Spanish Fork, you see these simple things being so hard. I mean, roads, you want them. We have them here so easy. They were hard to come by. Bridges were hard to come by. Schools were hard to come by, although they were the first buildings really we had. To build a church, when Albert Thurber worked on getting a church built, it took more than a decade to get the darn building built, you see. So schools were one of the struggles that he as mayor and local people worked on, and they had little school here, little school there, and right after he moved, they built this school that is now named here, or was named, the Thurber School, in his honor. And there are 2 or 3 landmarks in Utah, Thurber Peak and Thurber Creek. There were several Utah names that honor Albert King Thurber.
So the Thurber School now is our city office building.
Yes, and he would be delighted.
Well, as an early mayor and an early pillar in our community, I think it's a well-deserved landmark in his honor.
And the family's very proud of that today.
Well, Albert Thurber lived here in Spanish Fork as a founder for, 23, 24 years?
Well, he arrived in 1851. And then he was assigned by Brigham Young to move to Sevier County, 1872. He actually moves his families down in 1874. So you do the math, 74 to 51, You got
23 years.
a long period of time. And many of his children were born here. 2 of his children lived here afterwards. And the family's well connected to Spanish Fork.
Now, most people at this period, you know, didn't live all that long, but after living here in Spanish Fork for 24 years, he moves down there, and he has another whole life that he leads down there.
He does, but he also was born in 1826 and dies in 1888. So he's in his 60s when he dies.
Oh.
But so he's had a full life in those 60 years.
Yeah, I mean, like you say, an amazing man. He not only the landmark here in town, but like you say, there's a peak and a creek named after him.
And in researching his life, you find correspondence and basically he is a good friend and associate with some of the big names in early Utah history. Brigham Young knows him personally and well. Apostle George Albert Smith is one of his best friends. Wilford Woodruff becomes one of his best friends. And so he's associating with the movers and shakers from really the 1850s on here in Utah.
In this relationship, do you detail that here in the biography?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
So, Bill, it seems like, this man involved with the movers and shakers, that this is really a biography that you can pick up and learn about this great pillar of Utah history who really was a member of our early community.
Yes. And one thing that biography does for you is not only inform you about history, but good biography makes you reflect about yourself. What do I do about raising a family? What do I do in my community? What do I do? So it's an experience that isn't just informational.
Well, Bill, thank you for being here. We want to tell you, come down to Confetti Antiques and Books and pick up a signed copy. We'll have Bill sign a bunch before he leaves. Another Kind of Gold, The Life of Albert King Thurber. Come on down to Confetti Antiques and Books, 273 North Main. Bill, thank you for being here, and thank you for watching Turning the Page.
Thank you very much.